All right, welcome back to episode unknown number of physical education, uh, podcast style, sitting down with a Lumos coach, a Lumos member, getting deep into it or somewhat into it, right? We're
Yeah.
limiting it to 5 questions. We found that keeps ideally some of us in that like 20-minute range that's nice and snackable versus the 40-minute long form
Mhm.
philosophical navel gazing. I am here today with Lumos coach Brett. Brett, why don't you tell people real quick, just in case they've never seen your face, in case they are one of those unprivileged masses
That'd be
who just,
impressive.
yeah. Tell them what you do at Lumos. Tell them,
Yeah.
who you are.
So I do a couple things at Lumos. I'm one of our three full-time coaches. I coach group class, right? So our functional fitness group class. I do personal training. And then I also run our hybrid conditioning program, which is a specialty program we started last year that focuses more on long duration endurance-based conditioning, foundation and running. So I'm kind of our sustained effort conditioning endurance specialist, I guess you would say, around
Cool.
here. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, we're going to get right into it, right? We've got 5 questions today. We're going to talk, kind of like overview about, running and then about the sort of hybrid program and some of the kind of new things that we're doing in 2026 and ways that we are like aligning that with the way you've wanted to run the program from the beginning.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
first thing, let's talk about running, right? Something that
Let's talk running.
almost everybody has done. I hope everybody's done at some point, right?
Yeah.
And some people enjoy or unenjoy to different levels. My funny running story, I grew up playing soccer. I would run for soccer, things like that, but I never really ran on my own. I
Mhm.
didn't really like it. I had a girlfriend in college once. She was a big runner. She ran, marathons and things
Yeah.
like that. And we was once, talking to her and I was like, yeah, they talk about like a runner's high, but like I just like I've never
Yeah.
gotten it. I don't understand what you're talking about. And she's like, you've never run more than like 15 minutes like sustained.
Yeah.
And she was right, like it happens, after that. And, I've since, explored that. But at that time, I kind of didn't know what I was missing. So let's first just talk about, what is different between sort of running as a practice, as a discipline, and what we do in the gym, in our group classes, sort of CrossFit style workouts or, weight training. How do those two sort of like buckets, where are they similar and where are they different?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think, the biggest thing is like, I'm just a huge proponent of running as a discipline in and of itself, right? Running is just such an innately human activity. It's such an innately human movement. And if it's something that a lot of folks get like a mental block around, right? And we all have these in different aspects of our life. But I encourage everybody, if you feel like you're one of those people, to explore it for its own sake, right? And what I mean by that is, yeah, that's a great point. How does it compare to kind of running in group class or other modalities that we might explore in group class? I think there's a couple distinctions there. um, in group class, everything kind of gets crunched down to like the same speed, effort, intensity, if that makes sense, right? So everyone
All running does,
running,
right?
yeah, for sure, right? And so if your only experience with running is running in group class, right? So you're running 200 meters at a time, 400 meters at a time, maybe up to a mile at a time, pretty infrequently. Combining it with other things where you have this cross-sectional fatigue, or mixed modality fatigue in there, that experience is totally different than, going for something that's truly, we had this conversation yesterday, like that truly aerobic level or that
Mm,
true aerobic level of intensity. That's a sustained effort where we let our body kind of get used to um, producing longer duration energy. You know what I mean? And so I think, it's different from, I mean, obviously it's different from weight training and gymnastics and other things that we do from a power perspective, from a movement perspective, from a repeatability perspective. We were talking about this the other day, is like the number of reps, right, in running. And I don't know if this is where this kind of fits in on the list, but why is running so much more difficult to kind of
technique,
change
right?
technique, right, is because when you go for a 400-meter run, you've gotten, 400, 300 reps in, right? When you've done 5 power cleans, which can take the same amount of time, you've done 5 reps versus 300. So the muscle memory becomes that much more grooved, and it
And
becomes a little bit harder to.
like the inherent ease
Yeah,
of being really intentional, being really locked in for 5 reps where you're like,
yeah,
"I've gotta do this." And, things like a power clean or something where if you don't, there's immediate feedback of like, "Well, that the bar didn't go where I
yeah, yeah,
wanted
yeah,
it to." Whereas running, it's a much more of like a kinda sliding scale almost,
for
like,
sure.
you can ambulate forward, right? You can propel
You're gonna
yourself in
go,
a
yeah.
direction with, like, pretty low quality movement
Mhm.
or really high quality movement, and it becomes, you know, up to you, right? Up to
Yeah,
your ability to stay intentional, up to your strategy for practice, up to your coaching,
for sure.
right? Of like, is that going to be high value movement time or just sort of getting through it? And I think there are times where it can be either, and one is not not always required, right? It's not required that every step I ever run is like perfect,
For sure.
right?
For
Or
sure.
maybe that's just impossible,
I think
right?
yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's impossible. When we go through like running mechanics, we'll talk about like, okay, we're going on a 20-minute, 30-minute, 40-minute run. It's like I want you to spend 20 seconds at a time thinking about the cues that we've given you, and then the other 40 seconds of the minute just free flow.
Yeah,
And
that's
then 20 seconds on, 40 seconds, right? And like
right.
kind of having a bite-sized version of being able to focus. Because focusing for 40 minutes on the same thing is, yeah, it's not practical.
Yeah, I mean, running, right? I've talked to you about this book before. I love Chi Running, the
Yeah.
book by Danny Dreyer. There's a Murakami book about running where he talks about how he got, the author, like, fiction author, talks about how he got into running. And, there are other sort of like mindfulness books, right? About like walking meditation and running
Yeah.
meditation. And I think a lot of what they talk about is something similar to that, this kind of like periods of sort of drawing your intention into what you're doing, right? Focusing on how are my feet striking the ground or, one piece of what you're doing, but knowing that you can't go on a 40-minute run with pure intention on every foot strike.
Yeah.
It needs to be right a minute on, 20 seconds on, and then a minute off or
Yeah.
40 seconds off, whatever it is, of okay, now I'm just gonna run.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna bring it back in and I'm gonna bring it back out. Danny Dreyer talks about like he sets a watch to beep like
Hmm.
at the minute. And it's like beep, okay, I'm on, I'm thinking about something, beep, okay, I'm off, and I'm just kind of cruising. Um, and I do think I think it's an interesting thing is like the difference between that and, weightlifting training, higher skill gymnastics training, putting it all together in a sort of like CrossFit style program where a lot of that time the intention is sort of inherent, right?
Yeah.
Like there's almost like you can't just cruise through a set of
I
toes
mean,
to
yeah, you
bar.
need to
Like you
like
can't, yeah,
create a threshold level of power,
right,
to make the movement happen
right,
where like running doesn't experience that. So the
right,
way that we kind of naturally ebb and flow through it
right.
is naturally a different thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, it's almost more like, in a music standpoint, like, keeping a beat, which you can almost zone out
Yes,
and keep a beat, which, I think running, we talk a lot about kind of metronomic
for
and
sure.
sort of beat style stuff. And then like, playing a solo where it's like, I gotta be in there.
Yeah.
And if
No, I
I'm
think that's a
not,
great
it's just
example.
gonna
Yeah.
kind of like bleh, fall off. And then we've
Whenever,
already talked about the second one a little bit, but let's get into it a
mm,
little deeper is like, with all that said, what makes getting better at running so hard? I'd say like broadly, and we can talk specifically
mhm.
about like why it's so hard for a certain person or certain people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first item I think we kind of just talked about, and I'll just like repeat it for clarity, but like that kind of repolution where like, you know, you've done it maybe in a suboptimal way so many times,
Right.
right? And so it takes so many times of doing it with intention, which we just talked about is really hard to do
Mhm.
to improve.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's impossible, doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It totally is worth doing, right? Um, so I think that's one that makes it challenging. Number two, I think a lot of folks get like a mental block around running uniquely, right?
Mhm.
More so than sitting on a rower for the same amount of time or sitting on a bike for the same amount of time. It's like there's a mental, as you were just talking, I was thinking about kind of the flow and meditative and, without getting like too hippy dippy with it, right? Which I
Let's
which
do
I've
it.
tended to
Yeah.
do, is like there is a flow aspect to running, right? And there's a mindset that goes with the mechanics of it. And I think if your attitude towards it is so white knuckled and so
Mm.
hate driven, for lack of a better word or lack of a better phrase, that's going to make it really hard to relax the muscles that need to relax, right? We always talk about tension in
Mm.
in movement, in like, okay, you need to have tension here, have tension here, have tension there. What we don't talk about is like the sides of the antagonist side that needs to relax
Right.
during the movement. And I guess what I mean by that is if you're pulling, your pushing muscles are relaxing, or if you're pushing, your pulling muscles are relaxing. It's the same thing in running, right? As you stride with one, the muscles that aren't working need to be not working, right? They
Right.
need to allow the stretch reflexes to happen. They need to allow the natural swing of the body. And so if you attack running with a natural emotional tension and mental tension to it, um, the mechanical tension is going to be there in places where it shouldn't be. So I think that's also something that's really challenging for a lot of people.
It's interesting, and to make it even more hippy
Mm,
dippy, talking about that kind of like tension and relaxation. And you talked about a little before, like if we only ever run in a group class perspective, if we're only ever
yeah,
running 200s and 400s,
yeah,
things like that, and if we're only ever running that with other people around me in a sort of like, some sort of like a kind of race style thing, where always, if I am not a natural runner, my feedback is always like, shit, everybody else is like twice as fast as me, things like that.
yeah,
I think it even more so creates that sort of atmosphere where it is hard to
yeah,
relax, right? Where I do feel like all my runs need to be kind of like pushed at that high level of tempo,
yeah.
right? I've had this like kind of personal experience with running where there was a point where I was running a lot, right? Both like kind of pre when I first started doing CrossFit and right in the beginning, running a lot, racing, right? Really like happy with how things were going.
Mm,
Um, and then both like, from getting more into like the weight training side of things, like doing a little less running, then a couple of different injuries and things like that. And I've had things where I'm getting back into running,
mhm,
right? And just by doing that and like thinking about old paces and stuff, I can feel myself that tendency to kind of white knuckle it, that
for
tendency to
sure.
be like, man, I need to be here, I need to be there, and never letting myself sort of like relax. Again, this is less on the like what my, agonist antagonist muscle is doing,
Yeah.
more on the just sort of like relaxing from a kind of like soul perspective.
And I don't think those two things are like super,
Right. Right. You can't do one
exclusive.
without the
Yeah,
other.
like yeah, I do think that there's like a ton of overlap between that when you get into
Right.
something that's as repetitive as running versus weightlifting, which is very discrete.
Right.
The movement itself is very discrete. I do think that those things overlap more and more.
And sometimes I get, we'll get somebody in group class and they're like, yeah, I hate running, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah. And it's almost like if they never run on their own outside of class, sort of like on their own
yeah,
terms, how do you ever develop, this ability to appreciate this thing in a sort of like, again, non kind of like codified or non-scored
yeah.
fashion, right? Where it's just like doing it for an experience, doing it for a feeling, kind of again, like sort of being able to kind of like relax and groove and kind of like, fall into this. Your only experience now is this like basically like everything is the test. Everything is
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
for states.
And like not to mention how should I say, like the interference fatigue.
Right. Oh,
Like,
right. Yeah.
like if you only ever start a run
After
at
you're doing a bunch of squats.
175
Yeah.
beats per minute, or
Right. Yeah.
after like, you have so much like blood in your muscles from doing something else, or not blood in your legs from doing upper
Doesn't
body
feel
stuff.
good.
Yeah, like that is going to make a total difference in the
Right.
way that you perceive it.
Okay. Um, Sweet. Before, I mean, I want to talk about hybrid, but
Mm,
I think we're on a good point. So, like, if somebody wants to get better at running,
yeah.
obviously, and first answer I'm sure is just run more, right?
Yeah.
But like, a more discrete sense, like, what would you say are a couple of things, a couple of, I
Yeah.
would say like broad bucket things
Mhm.
that we want to do if we're like, yeah, you know what, this year I'm gonna get better at running.
Yeah. I have like two very like specific answers to this
Okay.
question, and yeah, if you want it more broad. we can go more broad. But I think two things that people should explore is, I mean, obviously running more is going to help, but like you can't just like do that, right? Like because one, like most people will running more, they'll add on so much volume way too quickly and injure themselves, right? I've seen that a ton of times, right? So it needs to be like incremental, but yes, running more helps. In that running more, you need to explore and very intentionally explore different paces, right? And so, we talk about, especially if your experience with running is group class in a combined interference movement scenario where you have fatigue from other things, everything gets crunched down to kind of one pace, whether you're running an 800, a 400, a 200, everything gets pushed down.
Survival pace.
Yeah,
Yeah,
survival pace.
right.
No, that's a really good
Yeah.
way of describing it. And what I tell people, especially when they join hybrid, right? We talk about expanding. We're trying to like shred the gears apart, right? We're trying to create more disparity. That's the only goal I tell people. When people first start hybrid, our goal is to just create as much disparity as we can from your slowest pace to your fastest pace. And we're going to spread everything out. And in spreading that out, we create gears 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not literally
Sports
5
car
gears.
6. We went
Yeah,
6
right. Yeah,
gears. Yeah.
6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Whatever.
New automatic Tiptronic transmission. Cool
All-wheel drive,
car
yeah,
stuff.
car
Yeah.
stuff. But as you spread that out, right, we will create a different relationship with each one of those gears. And I think that's really important for people. And that's how we start to develop being a better runner, right? So it's like I can go for a 40-minute smooth, easy jog where I might be going at 10, 11, 12-minute miles. And that's fine, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that. And then I might go to a track or out to Zilker Park or something, and I might run 100 meters at a time at like a faster pace. I don't want people going out in full sprints and hurting their hamstrings or anything, but something at like a faster pace. Then we rest for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and do it again, right? And exploring what it feels like to run at those different paces. So that's the first thing I would say is like pull those paces out as far as you can and explore different ones in between. Number two is find some grass and run barefoot. Like our running shoes. I mean, I won't get into the whole thing. We don't have time. If you want to talk running shoes, come find me. But running shoes these days don't incentivize you to strike the ground properly, right? They give you too much in a short sentence. They give you too much cushion.
Well, certainly there's a lot of running shoes that don't,
There's a
right?
lot
Like
of
I
running
do
shoes.
think,
Yeah.
there are some that do,
You have to
right?
go
But
out of
like,
your way to find
and
them.
you have to know what you're looking for.
The one
right?
that you're getting served on Instagram
Right.
is probably, if you're not a runner, the one
Right.
getting served you on Instagram is probably not the one that's going to encourage the best mechanics. And so the best mechanics tend to happen when you can, in a safe way, right? Meaning very minimal volume and like monitored volume, go out, run a little bit barefoot. You might notice your calves are, and what do I mean by running barefoot? Go in Zilker Park, run 50 meters at a time at like a hotter pace, right? Like something that feels a little faster than what you're
Fast
running.
jog.
Yeah, fast jog, something you faster than what you'd run in group class.
Right.
You know what I mean? And run for 50 meters, walk around for 20, 30, 40 seconds, do it again. Do that 5 to 10 times. You know what I mean? So it takes you 10 minutes, like less than 10 minutes. And that's going to improve the way that you strike the ground naturally because your body knows when you're barefoot, I'm not going to throw my heel into the ground and feel that reverberation that goes all the way up to my brain that you can in a highly cushioned running shoe, right? And so it kind of forces better mechanics.
So this is like a way to basically train mechanics in a kind of like natural
Very
biological
natural.
way where
Yeah.
it becomes less about trying to like hold a bunch of cues in your head. Okay,
Correct.
I want to strike with the ball of my foot. I want to pull my leg up. I want to feel my hamstrings. I want to lean forward.
Correct.
I want to do all these things. And just like being able to kind of like
Just do it.
feel it and
Just
integrate
do
it. Yeah. And you do that like
natural.
have somebody do that for, 10 lengths and then put their shoes on and go on a
Yeah,
on a
sure.
jog.
I mean, I first time you do it, I would just leave it at that. Right. Your
Yeah.
calves might be really sore the next day because you haven't been using them to run. And you will in that scenario. And so building into it easily, yeah. In a lot of people's programs, I'll put like 3 to 5 minutes of barefoot running and then throw your shoes on and then we'll hit the track.
Yeah.
So,
And before we get into logistics stuff, but there are shoes like you're not just to make sure that the point is clear, you're not an anti-shoe technology person, right?
correct.
This
I
is
think
kind
every
of
shoe
like
has a place.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a right tool, right job sort of thing.
Correct. It's just like the way the market has formed
Yeah.
in years of late. puts like the coolest tool for every job,
Right.
and that's not
Everybody needs a carbon plated shoe to run
at
zone
38
two,
millimeter
right?
stack height with
Yeah.
10 millimeter drop.
Yeah, I
And if
mean,
you don't know what I'm talking about, it doesn't matter.
does every shoe have a purpose, or are there some? I mean, I think it's okay to say like there actually are some. I'm thinking about this in like
Mm,
quartiles or something.
yeah.
That like ultra cushion, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I guess maybe like if you're running
Yeah.
ultra marathons, things like that, where it's like
I mean, or
regardless of what's
if you're
happening.
trying to like transition, maybe you've had
Mm,
maybe you're coming back from an injury and you need shock absorption,
hmm
right? Like yes, there's a need for that,
hmm
Um, because yeah, you're not ready to absorb the shock just yet, and so like you might need something to mitigate that. But
Right.
I wouldn't grab the highest cushiony shoe,
Right.
run every single thing that you do in that for 2 years.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
And right, because eventually the goal is you absorb the shock, or like, or in the goal is that like your technique is good enough that you've reduced the shock, right? That
Correct.
like each stride is less of like a jarring blow,
Exactly.
right? And sometimes those shoes can sort of like encourage that, right? They
They
can
encourage that
encourage a
because
form of
they
running,
take the shock
right?
for you,
Yeah,
and they don't encourage the efficiency of propelling yourself forward as
cool,
well.
very cool. Okay, let's get into hybrid stuff, right? So you've been working on this for a while, kind of new format for hybrid, right?
Yeah.
And we're gonna launch this in 10 days or something
Yeah.
like that. Tell me about what that looks like.
Yeah, so we're launching a 5 day a week hybrid program. And just taking like a quick step back in the history, we started this program a year and a half ago or something, middle of 2024. And throughout 2025, one of my goals was to offer more to the current constituents and offer more to people coming in from outside the gym looking for yeah, hybrid style, high rock style, Spartan race style training. Um, so that was kind of the impetus for this. And so, I always wanted to offer more options to people. But as the year went on, as our group has gotten tighter, I guess, for and as I, our my coaching relationship with those folks has grown, one of the things that I noticed that I get a lot of fulfillment out of, and I think that our folks get a lot of value of or out of is having one person kind of manage their more and more and more of their fitness arc rather than kind of having, well, I have a group class coach, I have a running coach, I have this, and no one's really like above it, seeing kind of everything and making decisions for them or helping guide them, I guess is a better
Or it
word.
requires like a very knowledgeable and intentional member. They're
Yes.
like, here's how I'm going to perfectly balance my 2 days of hybrid, my 2 days of group class. I go to yoga, I whatever,
And by the way,
and it's
that's
all
totally doable.
totally doable, but
But
it
it does require,
requires like
yes,
some mental effort. It
for
requires
sure.
like you've got to
Absolutely.
probably
Yeah,
like sit down and write it out and like have intentions for each piece and
for
what you
sure.
want to get out of
At
them.
different
And
parts of the year,
yeah,
need to be, yeah, turning dials for sure. Um, But, one of the things that hybrid and specialty programs in general, which hybrid is a specialty program, can provide is like, I can do that for you. Right. And like that is kind of my job. And so, more than just providing the 60 minutes of value in a session is like providing the value over weeks, months, and I mean, hopefully years. Right. And so, my goal was to create a full fitness regimen. So now we're offering 5 days a week that is going to include the same stuff that we have been having: a track day, an interval conditioning day here in the gym, like a simulation Sunday, which is our 90-minute kind of cornerstone weekly class, and then two hybrid strength days, which are going to be like kind of strength for runners, right? So a little bit more single leg focus, a little bit more hip flexion extension focus, things that are good for runners, but also that just build strength, right? That was kind of the big hole. If you only did hybrid, you weren't getting really any pure strength work. You were getting a lot of strength endurance work, strength stamina work, but not a lot of pure strength work. Um, and so that's what we're adding on. And so now we've got a class Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday, right? So Wednesdays and Saturdays are our off days. So yeah, that's what we're trying to provide.
cool. And I'm gonna skip a
Yeah.
question and come back to it because I think like this will like giving an example to this actually will like help make this all
Mm,
clear, right? So you talked about this idea of like, somebody, you being, for your hybrid athletes, is kind of like you are the person who's doing a lot of the organization of like what your week looks like, what a training block looks like, what we call, in the weightlifting or the, program design world, like a mesocycle looks
Mhm.
like, right? What does a couple of months look like, or between races or whatever we're doing? Say I'm somebody who's been going to our group classes
Mhm.
even 5 days a week. Say it's the
Yeah.
exact same amount of days, right? I've been used to going to group class and I'm very consistent. I go 5 days a week and then I switch and I start with the hybrid 5 day program. Like, how is that different? Like, what is the experience? How is the experience different? Aside from just like the difference in what they're going to be doing, right?
Yeah, I
Like,
mean,
obviously
I do think
they'll be
that's
running more stuff
it's
like
an
that,
important difference
right?
though, because
Right.
I do think that volume management,
Okay.
and like that
Interesting.
overall
Right.
weekly workload, especially in running,
Mhm.
is just a little bit more relevant, or a little bit higher priority to manage than necessarily one's weekly volume in group class. Like
Right.
we do a really good job of you know the difference there is like in group class, you can, as you are able to manage more volume, even if the volume of a week in group class stays the same, as you get more fit, you just turn the intensity dial and that makes up for it.
Right.
With running, you kind of do need to like continue to build your volume even as your intensity increases. And so it's not just kind of like a one for one dial, you have to move both of them separately. And so I do think that besides the fact that it is different movements, I do think it requires a slightly more watchful eye as to how you progress over a long period of time in the modality of running specifically. Um, I think number two, one of the things that we really like, and hybrid offers like a more unique exposure to it, is I encourage everyone not to like be some overly competitive athlete and overly focused on like competition schedule. I don't even think of it as like competition so much, but more like put events on the calendar that you want to do and you want to like express your fitness in. It's not about winning, it's not about, it's like um the difference between a CrossFit competition and running a 10K is like you're not competing necessarily. It doesn't feel so versus other people as it
Mhm.
does against like
It's like a
you're
check-in.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
checking in with
Right.
yourself, you know what I mean? And so that's like a unique feature that hybrid is just a little bit more exposed to. And so, one of the things that I like to do with people is like, okay, let's look at your calendar for the year. You know what I mean? What events do you want to do? And a lot of our programming is designed around some of the more popular events, high roxes, Spartan races, half marathons, 10Ks, all that sort of stuff. And so managing your workload kind of up and down and focusing on different things at different times of the year, I think that's going to be a big difference than how somebody who's used to coming in group class day after day after day might feel like a different experience.
And I mean, one thing that jumps out at me is just, this is the sort of like how the sausage is made. But when we program group class,
Mm,
even for that person who's coming 5 days a week,
mhm.
we're going, okay, maybe one week they're coming, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then the next week they're skipping Wednesday, but they're coming Saturday. And one week they're going to come both weekend day,
Yeah,
something. And that means they're going to get some different exposure to different stimulus throughout the week, and we program to kind of balance it, that
yeah,
like kind of like you could come to any of those days and they're all going to sort of be relatively equal, all things considered. Whereas the hybrid program, the way that you have rebuilt this or built this
mhm,
new 5 day meant, kind of offering, is with the assumption that like you are going to come to these five specific days. We know our inputs and our outputs
yeah,
like a lot tighter, and and that gives you the ability to kind of like plan for that and supervise that in a way where group class, we're assuming that kind of like flexibility, because we've got those 5 days people we're talking about, but also 2 and 3 day people and
yeah.
this, that, and the other, and we need to make it sort of like jive across all of that kind of like breadth.
Yeah, I guess like in a weird, it's almost more like team practice,
Mhm.
in
Right.
like this weird way,
Right.
where it's like, okay, we're all going to orient towards the same thing. Everyone has their unique goals and their unique like roles to play, I
Right.
guess, in that
Things you're
example,
working
like
on.
things that they're specifically working on and why we might tailor something to like a slightly different experience. But like more or less, we're all kind of orienting towards the same thing at different times of the year,
Right.
which, yeah, I think just, yeah, that creates a not better or worse, just a different experience and something that's a little bit more, um, I guess like cohesive, stacking month on month, year on year for an individual,
Cool. All right. Last question. Since the day you started here,
Mm,
one of the things that's really impressed me is like you've always had this very consistent vision of
mm,
what you want. I mean, what you want out of this place when you started,
mhm.
but certainly as you started building hybrid, like what you want that program to be,
Yeah,
right? And I think you've always done a really good job of being like, I don't want to make this just something that's sort of like, you know, finger in the wind. What are people into? Okay, I'm going to do that.
yeah,
But really kind of like always like, and I think this is a real asset to your athletes is like that you are responsible for like this is my vision of what good looks like in this program,
mhm,
right? Like that with this program hitting on all cylinders, aligning with my values, like kind of creating the best I can be, what that is, right?
yeah,
And I think one of the big things I'm excited for, and then I think the big steps into this 5 days has been is that like it feels like this is now starting to really like fully align with that vision and with those values, right? So
yeah, for sure.
how would you like what are I know what they are, but like what are those, you know, for somebody who's, maybe like, thinking about this less in the like, okay, it's 5 days a week and it's at these times and this is what it is, but more of like, what's the vision and what's the value statement about what this is?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think like, I like to start with like what someone is going to get out of hybrid, right? And what they're going to get out of hybrid is uh, a program that for demands like your willingness to work towards something, right? And so it doesn't mean that you have to be the world's greatest athlete or that we're trying to make Olympians or anything like that, right? But it does demand a level of accountability for yourself that you care to improve in whatever domain kind of sits within our program, right? Whether that's running, speed, endurance, now strength, right? But like it's built to progress. And that's really important, right? It's not a sweat class, you know what I mean? And we've talked about kind of the difference between those boutique type um, scenarios, and so the progression is paramount to kind of what we're doing. You know what I mean? Um, that said, like I just really value running. I think running is like an incredible expression of like human fitness and capacity. And it has so much opportunity that I think not enough people work on. You know what I mean? And I love doing that with folks. And so one of our intentions for the year is better running mechanics, right? Like up to this point, we've touched on running mechanics. We've done like a cycle or a cycle here, cycle there, where we hyper fixate on it. But most of what we've done is like training different energy systems. Well, 2026, we are going to be, everything that we program and everything that we do is going to have built in run mechanic improvement as the goal and orientation for this year, right? And so things like that continued improvement is something that we're really focused on.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'll leave it with this little,
Mm,
this isn't me and my mom get in this argument all the time. Maybe not an argument, but I'll talk to my mom. My mom's, 76, right? She's had two hip replacements.
mm,
And she is a very dedicated swimmer,
mm.
right? She swims every day,
That's awesome.
right? There's a pool at the bottom of her like apartment building, and she goes
Yeah.
and she's like badgering them to open it back up. Like the first day, it's like nice out. She goes to the Y when it's cold. She swims all the time.
That's awesome.
And I'm like, Ma, you need to do some ground stuff, right?
Mm,
Often this is about resistance training, but I
mm.
think this, like, the example, corresponds to running. I'm like, you need to do some stuff where you're like, your feet are on the ground.
Touching ground. Yeah.
And she's like, well, I swim every day. And what I always tell her is like, that's great, but you're not a fish,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to swim to the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
And in that same sense, I think that's a thing that we kind of talk about in fitness. Like, bike is a great tool, rower's a great tool. Ski erg's a great tool. All those things are great tools, but at the end of the day, they're tools. Whereas running is not a tool, right? Like running is the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And like at the end of the day, you can be the world's best assault biker, but you're never going to get that thing to move forward. It's never going to take you to the grocery store, right? Like it's never going to, get you out of danger,
Yeah.
right? But running might.
I
And so
remember
like,
my first 50K that I ran, and I kind of got bamboozled into it by the guy who owns a gym that I started going to in Houston a few years back. And,
you can shout it out.
we were, yeah, Skyline
Yeah.
CrossFit is an amazing spot.
Yeah.
I love it if you're ever in Houston. Um, and we were, out on the trails, like training for this. And this is my first time training for anything like this. I had no idea how you go about it. And we're like doing this 18-mile training run on my 30th birthday. Like I remember it very specifically, and I'm just like, this is miserable, dude. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? And I'm like, I kind of got bamboozled into it to begin with, and I was like, why are we doing this? And he's like, to know if your car breaks down 15 miles away from home, like you're not helpless. You know what I mean? And like I get that maybe my persona is a little bit more on those things, and maybe I'm a little anti-modern modernist in some
Right.
ways, but there is something that feels good and like true about that. And I think
Mhm.
that that's not unique to running. Like
Right.
I think fitness as a whole is a expression of that
Certainly.
metaphor.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, like these things are important, right? Like they make me feel good, and I hope they make other people feel good.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you biked all the time,
Yeah.
your ability to, right, if your car breaks
Yeah.
down, do something about it is improved,
Yeah.
right? But the kind of like one to oneness, and yeah, and I think like something that is truly like elemental, that is truly human, that we've done since the dawn of time, and God willing, and AI don't take over, like we'll continue doing.
Yeah.
Once AI can run for us,
When
then
AI
it's
can
then
run,
we're all
then it's
cooked.
over. Yeah. Then it's
All
over.
right. I think we've
Before we get too
digressed. Yeah,
squirrely.
we've truly digressed. Thank you for watching. If you want to, check out Brett's hybrid program, talk to him more about it. I had somebody yesterday talk to me in group class, and they're like, "Oh, I want to check this out.
Mhm.
What do they do?"
Yeah, if you're in our community already, one, you've probably seen me around, just tap me on the shoulder. Two, send me a message on Slack. If you're outside of our community, check us out on our website, submit an inquiry form, and I will reach out to you
Yeah,
about
you
it.
can email him directly. It's brett@lumosfc.com.
Also,
If you are a member, you can take your first class for free, so you can
yeah,
like jump into a hybrid class and just try it out
just let me know.
and see how it goes. Yeah, I told the person yesterday, I think it was Devin.
Oh, nice.
I was like, ask Brett because like, he'll push you to the class that gives
Mm.
you the most sort of like
Experience.
experience
Love
of
it.
what the program's going to be like.
Yeah.
But thanks for watching. Next week, we will see you again. Peace. All right. We went long. That's okay.